Officer Patrick McCarthy thought Valentine's Day in Meridian Plaza was just another shift where his badge was the only ID that mattered. But he made one fatal miscalculation. His bodycam was already recording the last professional decision he would ever make. Two men arrived at Meridian Plaza on the afternoon of February 14th, carrying two very different kinds of documentation. Officer Patrick McCarthy carried 18 years of institutional armor, a department record padded with 23 dismissed misconduct complaints and a supervisory chain that had learned, through habit and convenience, to look the other way. He carried the particular confidence of a man who had never been held to account for his instincts, a man for whom the park was not a public space but a jurisdiction, and everyone in it a subject awaiting classification. He did not carry, because he had never needed to carry, any assumption that black joy could be innocent. Dr. Andrew Andy Okeke carried a velvet ring box. Inside it sat a platinum-set sapphire, a family heirloom transported from Lagos to Lagos Island, to a Brooklyn apartment, to the inside pocket of a wool coat on a cold February afternoon. A stone that had survived immigration, sacrifice, and 3 generations of Nigerian-American perseverance. Beside the ring box, folded into the same inside pocket, Andy carried something McCarthy would later claim he never saw. A city-issued public event permit, filed 6 weeks in advance, stamped and signed, authorizing a private proposal in a designated section of the plaza at precisely 2:15 p.m. Andy had planned for everything. He was, by both profession and temperament, a man who understood systems, how they break people down, and how, with enough documentation and discipline, a black man could sometimes make them bend. As a psychiatrist who treated survivors of institutional trauma, he had spent his career mapping the exact distance between what the law promised and what it delivered. He had filed the permit because he knew. He had kept the receipt because he knew. He had arranged for witnesses and a photographer because he knew that in America, a black man proposing in public is never simply a man proposing in public. What Andy Okeke could not plan for, what no permit, no degree, no 3 generations of careful striving could fully armor him against, was the moment Officer McCarthy pushed through the Valentine's Day crowd, looked at a man on one knee holding a ring out to the woman he loved, and saw not a proposal, but a crime in progress. The body cam rolling on McCarthy's chest saw something else entirely. It saw everything. If you're already feeling something about this story, stay with it. What happens next in that plaza is something you will not believe. Keep watching. Andrew Okeke had also built a system, though his had cost him considerably more to construct. He had been 6 years old when his parents, Chukwuemeka and Adaize Okeke, arrived in the United States from Lagos with 2 suitcases, a folder of credentials that American institutions would spend the next decade refusing to fully recognize, and a velocity of ambition that their adopted country had not quite prepared itself to receive. His father had been a cardiologist in Nigeria. In New York, he spent 4 years requalifying, studying in a studio apartment while his wife cleaned offices on the overnight shift, and Andy slept on a fold-out couch between textbooks and takeout containers. By the time Andy was 10, his father had his American license. By the time Andy was 12, his mother had opened a small catering business. By the time Andy was 28, he had a medical degree from Columbia University and a specialization in trauma psychiatry that would take him, eventually, to a private practice in Midtown that focused on one specific and underserved population. Black men and women whose psychological wounds had been inflicted by the institutions that were supposed to protect them. He understood his patients not simply as a doctor, but as a student of everything his parents had survived and everything he had watched them survive. He had sat across from police officers who wept in his office about what they had done and could not undo. He had sat across from young men whose entire relationship with public space had been collapsed into a reflex of fear by a single encounter at age 16. He understood, with clinical precision and personal intimacy, exactly what a badge could do to a body before it ever became a legal matter. This is why, when he decided to propose to Emily Vance, he did not simply buy a ring and choose a pretty afternoon. He built a file. Emily had been in his life for 4 years by then. 4 years of Sunday farmers markets and disagreements about whether oat milk was a reasonable life choice, and long evenings on her apartment floor with wine and case notes spread between them while she worked on her own graduate research in urban policy. She was the kind of woman who made him feel simultaneously more himself and more interested in becoming someone better. She was white, and she was fully, unsentimentally aware of what that meant in the context of their life together. Not as a source of guilt, but as information. The way a good researcher treats any variable, something to understand, account for, and refuse to let distort the larger truth. She had been with him through the sleepless weeks of his practice's first year. She had held him on the night he came home from a session with a patient who had attempted suicide following a wrongful arrest. She had sat in the gallery of a city council hearing when he testified about police trauma and the shortage of psychiatric resources for affected communities. She did not know he had been carrying a ring for 3 months. She did not know that the ring had already crossed an ocean once before. The sapphire had come from his mother's hand, not purchased for the proposal. It had been there, on Adaeze Okeke's finger for 31 years, placed there by Chukwuemeka in Lagos in 1993, during a ceremony that predated their American life by nearly a decade. It was a deep, cornflower blue, set in platinum, with 2 small diamonds flanking it like parentheses around a word too important to leave unguarded. His mother had pressed it into his palm 6 months before Valentine's Day, on the evening of his parents' anniversary dinner, with a steadiness that told him she had been waiting for this moment for years. "This ring has been on the hands of women who built things," she said. Not dramatically, but in the flat declarative tone she used for truths she considered self-evident. "Make sure it goes to someone who will keep building." He had spent 3 months having it cleaned, the prongs checked, the band resized. He had kept the jeweler's receipt. He had photographed the ring against a white background for insurance documentation. And then he had done something that no one in his family had ever had to do when they wanted to celebrate in a public space. He had filed a permit. The City of New York's Department of Parks and Recreation requires a special events permit for any organized gathering of 25 or more people in a public park. Andy had 17 guests planned, close friends, Emily's sister, his parents, but he filed anyway. He filed because he was a black man intending to kneel in a public space and produce a piece of jewelry from his coat pocket. And he understood, with the clarity that his profession gave him, exactly how that scene could be misread by someone who had already decided what they were looking at. The permit was approved on January 3rd. The confirmation number was P2024-021-4007. He had printed 3 copies. One was in the file on his home desk. One was in his email. One was folded in the inside pocket of his coat, directly beside the ring box. He had thought of everything. Everything except McCarthy. The afternoon was cold and specific, the way February afternoons in New York are cold. Not brutally, but with a kind of gray insistence that makes everything feel slightly more serious than it actually is. The plaza was decorated for Valentine's Day in the way public spaces get decorated. Reluctantly, with red and pink banners near the food carts and a balloon arrangement near the south entrance that had mostly deflated. Emily had been told they were meeting friends for a birthday lunch. She arrived in a green coat Andy loved, her hair loose, slightly distracted because she had been in the middle of a chapter revision when he called her out of the apartment. The guests were already there, arranged in the kind of loose, organic cluster that looks accidental and is entirely choreographed. Andy's mother caught Emily's eye and smiled the smile of a woman who has been keeping a secret and is relieved to be almost done keeping it. Emily frowned slightly, not with displeasure, but with the particular alertness of a woman who has just registered that something is happening around her that she doesn't yet have context for. Andy moved through the cluster toward her. He had rehearsed this. He knew his lines, knew the order of the words, had lain awake the previous night running through them the way a surgeon reviews a procedure. Not from anxiety, but from respect for the gravity of what he was about to do. He reached for the ring box in his inside pocket. He felt it there, solid and warm from being pressed against his chest for 2 hours. He looked at Emily and she looked back at him with an expression that was just beginning to shift from confusion into understanding. He went down on one knee. And then McCarthy's voice came through the crowd like a door being kicked open. "Step away from her, right now. Step away." The guests turned. Emily's expression froze mid-transformation, still caught between joy and comprehension, now being forcibly rerouted toward fear. McCarthy was pushing through the cluster of guests with one hand already on his radio, and the other extended, palm out, badge visible, as though he were dispersing a scene that only he could see. His eyes were on the ring box in Andy's hand, not on Andy's face, not on Emily's face. On the box. "Put that down." "Sir," I said, "put it down and step away from her." Andy rose slowly from his knee. He said, in the measured cadence of a man who has trained himself to be measured precisely in moments when measured is the hardest thing to be. "Officer, this is a private engagement. I have a permit. Her name is Emily Vance. She is my partner of 4 years." McCarthy didn't hear this. Or he heard it and filed it somewhere. That didn't change anything. He was already moving, his hand now on Andy's arm, his voice rising above the ambient sound of the plaza and the Valentine's Day crowd that had begun to stop and turn and reach for their phones. "Where did you get that ring? That ring is stolen property. I'm going to need you to put it down on the ground right now." Emily said, "What? No, I don't. He's proposing to me. He's my..." "Ma'am, please step back." "I'm not stepping back. This is my boyfriend. We live together." "Ma'am." Andy's voice remained level. "Officer, my name is Dr. Andrew Okeke. I am a licensed physician. This ring belongs to my mother, Adaeze Okeke, and I have the jeweler's receipt in my pocket, along with a Parks Department permit filed under confirmation number P202402-14007. I am not a threat. No crime is being committed here. McCarthy had already made his decision. That was the thing about it. The decision had been made before Andy opened his mouth, before the knee went down, possibly before McCarthy had even crossed the plaza. The decision had been made somewhere in the accumulated 18 years of a system that had never once asked him to reconsider it. The handcuffs came out. Before we go further, if this is making your blood pressure rise, that means you're paying attention. This story does not end where McCarthy thinks it ends. Subscribe if you haven't. The next part of this is why everything you're feeling right now is about to matter. There are photographs from the next 4 minutes that would later be submitted as evidence. They show the faces of the 17 guests in various stages of disbelief. They show Emily Vance with her phone in one hand and the printed jeweler's receipt, which she had pulled from Andy's coat pocket while McCarthy's attention was briefly on his radio, held up toward the officer in the other, her face carrying the expression of someone discovering, in real time, a particular variety of helplessness. They show Andy with his wrists behind his back, his posture straight, his face showing nothing that would later be described as anything other than composure, because Andy Okeke was a trauma psychiatrist, and he knew, with the cold clarity that only that kind of knowledge provides, that composure was the only currency he had left. "Officer, I have the receipt," Emily said, her voice tight and high. "I'm holding the receipt right now. For this ring, with his name on it, can you please just look at this?" McCarthy did not look at it. He was speaking into his radio, requesting backup for a theft situation, and the words landed in the cold air of the plaza and spread out across the crowd of now 40 or 50 people, all of them recording, all of them watching a man in handcuffs who had been on one knee 30 seconds ago. Andy's mother was at the edge of the group. His father had his arm around her. She was not crying. She was watching her son with an expression that those who saw it would later struggle to describe. Not broken, not hopeless, but ancient, in the way that certain kinds of grief are ancient. The kind that has been inherited across generations and does not surprise you even when it arrives. Andy was walked to the patrol car. Before he got in, he turned once and looked at Emily. She was still holding the receipt up, like a flag, like evidence, like something she could not lower, because lowering it would mean admitting it hadn't worked. "Call Marcus," he said. Marcus Webb was his attorney. Then the door closed. At the 28th precinct, McCarthy processed the arrest with the unhurried efficiency of a man who believed he had just done his job. He logged the ring as, quote, "suspected stolen property." He filed the incident under theft, suspected, 1 count. He did not, at any point during the 90-minute processing period, ask to see the permit confirmation number Andy recited twice more from memory. He did not ask to see the jeweler's receipt Emily had photographed and texted to the precinct's non-emergency line within 7 minutes of Andy's arrest. He did not run Andy's name through the medical licensing database, which would have returned a photograph, a clean record, and a list of published papers on police trauma and community mental health. What he did not know, what he had apparently forgotten, or never fully internalized in 18 years of wearing it, was that the camera clipped to his chest had been running since he crossed the plaza. The body cam had captured everything. It had captured his approach from 40 feet away, before he had spoken a word, at which point the footage showed Andy clearly on one knee, the ring box open and visible, surrounded by a group of formally dressed guests, with no indication of distress from the woman he was facing. It had captured McCarthy's first shout. It had captured Andy's identification of himself, his recitation of the permit number, his calm, repeated requests to be heard. It had captured McCarthy's response to those requests, which was to speak louder. It had captured the handcuffing, and it had captured in clear audio McCarthy saying to the backup officer who arrived 4 minutes later, "These guys always got a story," a sentence that, when it became public, would do more damage to his career than anything else on the recording. 19 of McCarthy's previous incident reports had included notations about camera malfunctions or delayed activation. The department's own records showed a statistical impossibility. McCarthy's bodycam had failed to capture any portion of 11 of the 23 complaints filed against him. An internal investigation that had never been completed was sitting in a supervisor's inbox, 18 months old, still flagged as pending. This time, the camera had not malfunctioned. This time, every second was there. Andy was released at 9:47 p.m. Emily was waiting outside with Marcus Webb, who had driven from a Valentine's Day dinner with his own wife and arrived still in his suit. Andy stood on the precinct steps for a moment, looking at the street. The yellow cabs, the bodega light, the February night that had continued on without him, and then he walked down to where they were standing. "The body cam footage," he said to Marcus, before anything. "All of it. Subpoena the footage." Marcus had already drafted the request on his phone in the car. The civil rights complaint was filed within 72 hours. The subpoena for all bodycam footage, dispatch records, processing logs, and internal complaint history was filed within 5 days. The law firm, Webb, Carrington & Associates, with a specific practice group for police misconduct litigation, had handled cases like this before, but Andy was not a passive client. He brought his own documentation, the permit confirmation, the jeweler's receipt, the insurance photographs, the guest recorded video from 17 different phone angles, and a 22-page personal account written the morning after his release that read, in places, less like a legal affidavit and more like a clinical case study. Because Andy Okeke could not stop being a psychiatrist even when he was the patient. The footage arrived pursuant to subpoena 14 days after the arrest. Marcus called Andy on a Thursday evening, and Andy put him on speaker while Emily sat across the kitchen table. "It's all there," Marcus said. Every second, including the comment. Andy was quiet for a moment. "File everything," he said. "Stay with us. Because what Internal Affairs found on that footage, and what they were forced to do about it, is the part of this story that the department did not want you to see. Don't go anywhere." The Internal Affairs investigation took 11 days once the footage was formally submitted. 11 days to review what 18 years had built. The audio was clean. Cleaner than McCarthy's supervisors would have preferred. Cleaner than the department's institutional habit of quiet resolution could comfortably absorb. The review board heard McCarthy's voice saying, "These guys always got a story." Not once, but 3 times across the recording, in slightly different registers, as if it were a phrase he had said so often it had lost meaning to him. They heard him refuse, twice, to look at the permit number Andy recited. They heard him tell the backup officer, while Andy sat handcuffed in the back of the patrol car, that the ring was obviously hot, departmental slang for stolen property, without having run a single check, made a single call, or reviewed a single document. They also heard Andy's voice throughout, measured, specific, calm in a way the board members would later describe, individually and without coordination, as remarkable under the circumstances. He had stated his name, his profession, his mother's name, the permit number, and his attorney's name in that order, clearly, 4 separate times. He had asked to see a supervisor twice. He had not raised his voice. He had not resisted. He had, in the clinical language of the psychiatric profession, demonstrated what his own published research called hypervigilant de-escalation. The particular exhausting discipline of a black man who knows that the cost of losing composure is higher than the cost of containing it. The board voted unanimously. On March 8, 2024, Officer Patrick McCarthy was summoned to a meeting with the police commissioner's office. His badge and service weapon were collected at the door. He was informed that he was suspended without pay pending a formal disciplinary hearing, and that the department was simultaneously the subject of a $7.4 million civil rights lawsuit filed on behalf of Dr. Andrew Okeke and several of his guests, alleging racial discrimination, false arrest, and deliberate indifference to a documented pattern of misconduct. McCarthy did not speak during the meeting, according to the 2 departmental witnesses present. He signed the forms he was asked to sign. He left through the side entrance. His attorney released a statement 3 days later saying that Officer McCarthy disputes the characterization of events and maintains that his actions were consistent with standard protocol. The statement did not address the audio. It did not address the 17 videos. It did not address the 23 prior complaints or the 18 months of pending investigation sitting unopened in a supervisor's inbox. The bodycam footage was released to the public the following morning. It was viewed 14 million times in 48 hours. 3 weeks after Valentine's Day, on a Saturday morning in early March when the weather had shifted just slightly towards something that might eventually become spring, Andy and Emily returned to Meridian Plaza. They came without a crowd this time. Just his parents, her sister, and Marcus, who had insisted on being present not as an attorney but as a friend. The plaza looked the way it always looked on a Saturday morning. Dog walkers, coffee cups, the sound of a skateboard somewhere on the far path. Ordinary and public and belonging, as all public spaces are supposed to belong, to everyone who arrives in it. Andy had the ring in his inside pocket again. He had not had it cleaned a second time or rephotographed. He had not filed a second permit, though he had checked, twice, whether one was required. He had not prepared remarks, which was unusual for him, because he was a man who believed in the architecture of language and its capacity to carry weight. But this time, when he reached for the ring and turned to Emily in the light of an ordinary March morning, he found that the words came without preparation. He told her about his mother pressing the ring into his palm. He told her about what it meant to carry something that had survived what his family had survived. He told her that he had spent his professional life learning how much it costs a person to be surveilled and suspected and reduced to a threat in their own joy, and that standing here with her now in this exact spot felt like something he refused to let anyone take from him, from them. He told her he wanted to spend the rest of his life building things with her. Then he went down on one knee, and Emily Vance said yes before he had finished the sentence. His mother made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry, and was somehow the most expressive sound in the plaza. His father shook Marcus's hand. 2 months after the settlement was finalized, $7.4 million, with an additional $1.2 million in institutional reforms agreed to by the department, including mandatory retraining and a new Bodycam compliance protocol. Andy stood at a podium in a Harlem community center and announced the formation of the Justice and Healing Foundation. The foundation's mission, he explained, was narrow in its focus and broad in its ambition, to provide free psychiatric care to individuals who had experienced police trauma, with a specific emphasis on communities that had historically had the least access to mental health resources and the most exposure to the conditions that made such resources necessary. The settlement had seeded the fund. The foundation would sustain it. He had already hired 3 therapists, secured a clinical supervisor, and identified 4 community partner organizations in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Harlem. Emily sat in the front row. His parents sat beside her. The room was full of people who had heard about what happened in the plaza on Valentine's Day, and people who had lived a version of it themselves without the benefit of a lawyer, a body cam, and 17 guests with phones. Andy looked out at them and thought about the ring in the box in his coat pocket on February 14th, about the way he had carried it against his chest for 2 hours, letting it warm there, letting the weight of what it represented settle into him before he walked into the plaza. He thought about what it cost to prepare for a joyful moment, as though it were a legal proceeding. He thought about the 19 body cam malfunctions that had preceded the one that didn't malfunction. He thought about the 23 complaints that had been closed. He thought about his mother watching from the edge of the crowd with that ancient, unsurprised expression. And then he thought about the word she had used when she handed him the ring. Building. This foundation, he said, to the room, to the cameras, to the community he had spent his career trying to heal and was now, imperfectly and urgently, trying to protect, is not about what happened to me. What happened to me had documentation, witnesses, and a camera that didn't malfunction. What happened to me had a resolution. Most of the people in this room know that most of the time, it doesn't. He paused. This is for the times it doesn't. The body cam that recorded McCarthy's final shift as a credentialed police officer is now part of the official court record. The footage has been cited in 2 pieces of pending state legislation on body cam compliance mandates. Andy and Emily set a wedding date for October. The Justice and Healing Foundation opened its first intake appointments in April. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something about what it costs to celebrate in public when your joy has always been treated as suspicious, share it. Because the next person who needs to know that documentation matters, that cameras matter, that composure in the face of chaos is its own form of resistance. They need to hear this story before they find themselves in a plaza, holding a ring, wondering if they should have filed a permit. They should. And they should not have to.